G'day, I'm Nick Ireland, and this is a particle effect that I've put together in Blender. I wanted to emulate what particular could do in After Effects, and so I was trying to sort of mimic it a little bit. Okay, so we'll start with a new file in Blender. There we go, there's our default cube. Now I'm not going to delete that cube as I do in most tutorials, not because I just want to be different, I just want a bit of a reference as to space. We're adding a path here. I'll go into edit mode, tab to edit mode. I'm going to go fairly quickly, so if you're not familiar with the interface, you might want to check back with us later. Anyway, away we go. So I'm pressing E here to extrude the curve. It's all on a flat plane at the moment. We'll just go through a little bit more. Okay, that's interesting enough. It's quite a large curve. Alright, I now want to just drag these points out in 3D space on the path, and you'll see where I'm going shortly. I'm going to set the camera up looking across the length of this kind of curve. We're going to attach some objects to the path. They're going to run along the path. It's a fairly standard thing. I guess the bit that differs with this tutorial is that the way the the particles are set up to give you that trail. Just go back into object mode. We're going to select our camera and we'll bring it over so we're looking straight down at this path. Press N on the keyboard to open up our numeric kind of entries. Camera we want to set at 90 degrees, and we'll go 0 for the other two coordinates. I'll just drop down, and you probably want to go back a little bit, and we'll go camera view. That's not bad. So you know, if we've got a particle running along that curve, that should give us a fairly interesting kind of look. Head in through here, around, voila. If you wanted, and I guess that you can adapt this to however you want. You can either have your point of interest being the cube, or you could composite it over an existing video shot. Anyway, we'll move on. Okay, next we want, now that we have our path, and look, I'm going to make a big point in this NURBS path. I'm happy with the name on that. We're going to make sure we name everything on our way through this tutorial. We're now going to add in a generator for our particles. So we'll go to Mesh, UV Sphere. You could use a cube, you could use a single vertices if you wanted to. I've picked this object because it's got quite a few vertices, and I need a lot of particles created. Otherwise you could just, I guess, attach one vertice. We're going to tie this sphere. We're going to change the name of it. We're going to call it emitter. I now want to constrain it. Clicked on constrain here. We're going to follow path, select our path, NURBS path. There we go, and it's set up. Now if I go forwards and backwards on the timeline, it's not moving, and this is because we need to tick follow curve, and then we need to give it a duration. So we click on the curve, select that, we go into object data, path animation tick, follow tick. Now how do we do this? There we go. Evolute. Okay, so the total duration of the curve is 100 frames. We're going to bump that up to say 200. Evaluation time, it's going to take 200 frames to get from the start to the finish. We'll set that at 0 frames. We'll go to 0 on our timeline. We're going to add a keyframe there. We'll now jump forwards about 4 seconds, so you're looking about 100 frames. 200 frames. Alright, we'll go to there. Okay, so that's our last bit. So yep, 200 frames. Sorry, just taking a minute to get my head around what's going on here. We're going to add a keyframe. We'll jump off timeline editing. We'll select dope sheet because I'm a bit of a dope. And it's a bit easier to understand those keyframes because they look like what you'd normally see in After Effects. Okay, so we've got our keyframes. Obviously you can drag them out to however long you need your sequence to be. Okay, so we might go to 100 for this sequence. That's a pretty good speed. Okay. Fairly straightforward what we've achieved there. We've got an object, we've got a path, follows the path, and should create an interesting kind of look if there's some particles being emitted from the tail of it. Fair enough. Now the problem I got to then was adding the particles in with the particle generator. I couldn't get them to soften out at the end. I've tried ramps with the material, I've tried a whole bunch of things, but there doesn't seem to be a control in the particle system to taper off the end of the particles. In say particular, which is a plugin for After Effects, you'd have the alpha curve over the life of the particles, so you can blend them off into the distance. This particle system doesn't have a function like that, so I've done a bit of a workaround, and we'll see how it goes. So before I add in the particle system, let's make sure we've got a material added. I'm going to do a halo. Now we'll go full yellow on this input. Now I kind of did a tutorial on a fire flame look, and they had these settings, and I've used them on this, and it kind of works out fairly well. Add in 100% on that. The size needs to come right back, 0.2. Okay, so there's not a lot there, but because we're creating particles, they'll sit in over the top of each other, build up the alpha, they'll gradually get brighter, and it'll give you a little bit of depth to the colour. Call this fire. There's a material. We're going to go to texture input, add a texture, clouds. Now in the colour for the clouds, we're going to make this full red. Yep. In the colours, just going to crank up the contrast a little bit, and the size, I'm going to make the size of it a little bit bigger. So we'll go into the mapping, and we'll make these around about actually if I go 5 it's smaller, it's 0.5 I want to be. That's right, it's smaller. As you go up in size there, the texture becomes tighter and increases. Okay, so our texture's now plugged into our material. We're going to turn texture on, extreme alpha, and we'll see how we go with those settings. Obviously you can build those settings up as you change them as you like. You're going to get a better look. It's a matter of how much time you've got to create what you need to do. Okay, so at the moment particles are coming out. We've got some particles coming off our emitter. It's looking pretty ugly. We're going to change the background to black. This project relies on the alpha of the color. So there's some basic kind of particles being emitted at the moment. Okay, as you can see, the particles are flying off into space, not really giving us a tight tail on this object. We're just getting a, random all sorts. So that's the basic kind of principle. What we really want it to do is sit tight to the curve. Okay, so we're going to run into the particle system. We're here now. We're going to create this at 5,000 particles. We're going to decrease the life to 10 frames. Faces, vertices, as I say, play, go crazy. We don't want any velocity with our particles because we want them to stick to the path basically as they are being emitted, not to move. We're going to reduce that to 0. That will change our particles so that it stops them flying off. Now the problem we have here is you can see that they're all just dropping. That's because in field weights and force settings we have gravity set to 1 by default. We'll turn that off. I'll leave the other option up, and these are weights by wind and by charge and a whole bunch of different ways to affect the particles as they come out. In this tutorial I just really want them to sit there. Okay, so if I render that out at the moment, what we're seeing is not a lot, a bunch of pretty lights all in a row. To get a trail out of this, and firstly we also need to turn off the emitter because I don't want to see that bright yellow ball. I never find this button. Particle, we'll just cruise down, cache, other, physics, render, emitter, there it is. We'll turn that off, and so if I render it now, we've just got the particles, we don't have the original object. Okay, so those settings aren't really doing a lot, they're just making a few dots. And you'd say, okay, let's add lots more particles, and the problem with doing that is you just build up a solid blob, and you'll end up with, say, I'll try not to keep going on and on about this, but if I up the size of the halo, the size of the particles, so they will sort of join in, and we'll do a render now, basically got a caterpillar. Okay, nothing too exciting because there is no defining drop off. Okay, so I'm going to back that off. So the way I get round it, drop this back, we'll go to our top view. We'll create our object. What we're going to do is, now that we've got all this set up, we're going to duplicate our object. So we'll go pull it back to frame 0 and Shift D, created emitter 001 up there. Shift D, escape. Shift D, escape. Shift D, escape. And that should do us. We've got 5 objects all doing the same thing on the timeline. It's what we do from now that will create our particle effect and make it interesting. Okay, the first step you need to do before going any further is go forwards a little bit on your timeline so that your object has moved up off the tail. Now we're going to select our object, our second object. We'll go into our constraints, and there's an offset value here which will change the way it follows the path. Now if I pull that object back a little bit and then scale, it's a bit strange, but it's almost like you're making a physical object to make a particle one. Anyway, forget I said that. That doesn't really make sense. I guess it's a different kind of solution to a problem. I mean, there may be ways to do this in the node editor as far as putting a ramp onto like a light streak. I just haven't, for the life of me, been able to work out how to do it if you can. Okay, so we'll drag this right back here and we'll scale him right down too. A bit more. So what we're doing pretty much is creating the same particle 5 times, but each time a little bit further away and each time a little bit smaller, so hopefully giving us a bit of a trail. Now that's not a huge difference yet. If I go through and render that out, and just sometimes you have to run it back and forth a couple of times just to get to pick it up. It's not really going to show much there at all. It's still got not enough. Okay, what we can see though is as we run the particles up the path, they all kind of run in a line and are offset a little bit. Okay, so we're going to select our first particle, and the settings are 5010. We go to our next particle, and it's important here that we click next to the settings and we change this to a single user copy, otherwise you're going to change the particle on this system and it's going to change all of them. I'm now going to up this to 15, the life, and I'm going to drop the amount to 4000. Now go to the next one, go up to 20, 3000, so I'm just sort of going opposite directions on both those figures. Make sure you click that thing for every one of them. I think I might have missed one a second ago. 25. Is that right? If I go back to there, it should be 3 and 20, 4 and 15, 3, 20, 2 and 25. No, we're right. And that last one. so 1000, and in this life thing we'll go to what were we, 30 I reckon. Alright, let's see, hopefully we've got something that's going to look a little bit cool. So we'll just go through here, hang on. There we go, let's try rendering that out. Okay, so we can kind of see it needs a bit of adjustment, but it's basically tapering off to the end of the particles. It does that kind of thing. If we render it out, let's just try it sort of close up. Okay, and it's a bit hard to see. It is, or is it should be. It should be gradually dying off as it goes through. Okay, there's still a little bit too much there, so what we're going to do is back off the amount of material being created. So if we go to 0.2 in the size of the halos and we re-render, now we're looking a bit better. Okay, we'll up it a little bit. We'll go to 0.3. Okay. In our render section here, we'll go to 200. That's the length of our path. I don't really want to do HD. I just want a preview. I'm just going to pick POW. We'll go to 50%. I said 50, not 20. Give us a quick render. Go to AVI. Don't really need the alpha on this one. And we'll just watch it go through a little bit. Here we go. So it's kind of not all that exciting at this point in time. You can basically see it's got a larger kind of head on it, and it goes to a tail. So we've sort of achieved what we set out to achieve, but obviously we need to get these particles looking a lot nicer than they do now, and there's a big amount of tweaking that you can do from now on. Go into the nodes as well, defocus it, layer it up a little bit so that there's some more highlights and things. So if we just play that in real time, and that's got a little bit of potential to it. I think, you know, obviously you can see the dots in the end of it. You can change the positioning of the particles. I think one of my first jobs would be to go back to sort of this slide here and spread these out a little bit. You know, let's go to back into the offsets in the constraint, and we're going to spread these out just by clicking madly on the buttons. I'm just trying to keep the time down a little bit. Probably tutorials running pretty well over time now. I want to do another little render here to see if that's actually made a lot of any difference. Not a huge amount of difference. It's kind of stretched out the tail a little bit. And alright, well, from there you can come up with something that's looking fairly cool. So hope you've learnt something along the way, and we'll catch you next time.